We are back with the line now since the exit from the U.S. Senate race of Democratic primary challenger Maggie Toulouse Oliver. The campaign has been a bit of a snoozer. Republicans had 3 candidates running, 2 of whom had lost prominent races last election cycle, and 1 is a relative unknown. But on Monday, businessman Luis Sanchez announced his entry into the race with a slick campaign video. And the next morning, KRQE meteorologist Mark Ronchetti quit his job to run. So, Laura, in a past life, you led the state Democratic Party. What's it like at this stage of the game with a little less than 6 months until the primary, and you have 5 candidates, and you have sort of a big name like a Mark Ronchetti get in?
So just a quick correction. I'm not going to take credit for leading.
For leading, okay.
I was executive director,
okay.
Not chair.
Okay.
Very different. But in any event, yes, I'm intimately familiar with the party politics on the Democratic side, but the process is similar on the Republican side as well. And so we now have 5 people on the Republican side. It really comes down to the basics. So they're entering very late, in my opinion. I mean, this is a really, really short period of time that they have now, about a month, a little over a month. To collect all the signatures that they need to even get on the ballot. So that's step 1. In addition to that, they also have to get their ground game ready for the delegate selection going into the pre-primary convention, which are held typically in March. And this is all by state statute, so both sides have to do this. So with 5 people vying for this, you're talking about basically doing what they can to identify their delegates. What's interesting is that some of these folks have run for office before, so they probably have some connections to the party. They probably have been to some of these meetings. They know a lot of the regulars at the party. A name like Mark Ronchetti will help him in the actual primary in June, but I don't think it necessarily helps him at the party level unless he's been active. So he's got the name, but I think he's also going to be seen by some of the party regulars with some suspicion because he's sort of just jumping in so late and expecting that the name's going to carry the day, when these are regulars, these are party faithful. They go to all the meetings, they have very strong commitments to the party structure, and so I think that a lot of folks see that with a little bit of suspicion when some big name jumps in and expect it's going to be a cakewalk for them. That being said, he could potentially also garner a lot of attention and try to get a good ground game going, but it's going to be difficult, I think, for him. It's not going to be as easy to navigate those waters as maybe it would be with name ID in the primary.
Sure. Diane, do party faithful tend to sort of follow the money in this situation? Maybe he doesn't have the kind of infrastructure that Laura was talking about in terms of delegates, but do people get a sense of where the money's going in a race like this?
I don't think right at this moment that money is even an issue, except can he raise money?
Okay.
And the thing that Laura didn't mention, which is pretty well known behind the scenes, is that Mark is going to have access to all the Susana Martinez monies, fundraising monies, that Jay McCluskey is doing some of the staff work for Mark. And so that's a heavy duty asset right there, just to have being able to call on that fundraising group.
Those experienced names.
Those experienced people and the money sources. The other thing is the only thing I disagree a little bit is, yes, we did have 2 who have run for office before, but the other 2 never have, and I don't know, I'm not real familiar with them. I know they've been, that Elisa Martinez has been active in the Right to Life organization, and then the NRA and everything that
Luis Sanchez.
Luis Sanchez would have that connection through Cabela's. So they have those, and the other 2 have served some and been out there. So it may end up, starting this late, it may be a little difficult to get the percentage that Mark needs at the convention. But there is the caveat that if you go out and get the additional signatures, you're still on the ballot, primary ballot.
And then you can do that work.
And then I don't think it's a cakewalk for him, but his name ID, and there's a lot of things you look at for a candidate. Do they have experience? What are they like? Or is their family, are they pictured right, and that kind of thing. But the thing you can't teach anybody, are they right on the issues? But you can't teach somebody electability. And Mark has electability. The others are nice people, but they don't have that electability, and Mark has it. So that's going to stand him in good stead, I believe.
Okay. Now we do want to point real quickly, it's calibers, not
I'm sorry.
That's not a problem.
So I have a different take. Having
Okay.
run a Democratic primary and had to raise lots of money, I think the money is really crucial. And some of the pre-primary stuff, I decisively won the pre-primary convention, and the governor who I ran against, she came in third. And so, so first of all, you have to be electable, obviously. And I think the strategy is you have sort of a pro-life candidate who really is going to try to lock up that, now you've got a pro-gun candidate, and then you've got this outsider. I think Ron Ketty's going to run as the sort of Trump outsider, like, I don't know anything about politics, therefore elect me, right? Which I think is a little bit absurd, but it seems to be in this political environment that we're in. There's a whole bunch of people who are going to like that. Now they're not going to be the party insiders, right? They're going to be maybe people who will be drawn in through the Trump sort of efforts. I do think that whoever raises the most money in a crowded Republican primary, just like any primary, is likely to come out of it. So if Diane is right that Ron Ketty's got the inside track, aligning himself with the McCluskey-Martinez folks and some of that big money, and they see he's the best horse, because none of these other candidates are really that compelling. Although there is only one woman sort of really strongly pro-life, is my understanding, in that primary. There's rumors that another may get in. So I think he's in good stead to sort of, maybe if he can raise the money, to come out of the primary strong. But I just have to say, let's be realistic. These guys haven't even raised a 20% of what Ben Ray Lujan has raised.
Right, he's
almost at $3 million.
Sure.
He's going to run circles out of any of these guys who come out of the primary in terms of policy and experience. I don't agree with him on everything, but I'm just saying the guy is a battle-tested. And the last thing I'll say, this is the United States Senate. These are 100 supposedly of the best and the brightest in politics in the country. It's one step from being president. So to say, like,
You may be the only one who thinks that.
I was going to say,
I got to pivot
not
to
based
Ed
on
here.
what we see today.
And how does this feel? Does Ben Ray Lujan, does he have something to be worried about now that there are not just a big name like Ron Ketty, but 4 other people in there, and there seems to be some energy now in the Republican primary?
That's right. We never underestimate the competition. I don't care who you are, how far you are ahead in the polls, what the polls show. You have to take the competition seriously. With regard to the Republican Party, in this state here, they're lagging a little behind. They've been losing a lot of races. They just don't have the strength of that party here in New Mexico, and it's going to take a lot of money. It comes down to money, money, money. Name recognition is important, but that's what you're going to use the resource of the money to do, is to get your name out there. Now with Ron Ketty, he was a TV meteorologist. He probably sort of has limited exposure to the TV station that he worked for. There's Mick Rich out there who had spent a lot of money during his last campaign.
Sure.
So he has a little name recognition going on as well. So there may be a little bit of a race on the Republican side. I don't think that's over yet, but I think it's, as the others have said, who can raise the most money, who has access to that in order to get the name out there to all portions of the state.
Okay.
Just one quick thing that I think will make a difference is I have a lot of younger friends, 45 and younger, and they have been overwhelmingly excited about Ron Ketty getting in the race. If they can motivate their crowd and get those young people out to vote, that will make a difference in both the primary and the general election.
Okay. One thing we don't know about Ron Ketty is where he stands on many of these issues, and we'll find that out soon. Also, by way of disclosure, I have worked with Mark Ronchetti in the past at a couple of different stations. We will see how this shakes out. Pre-primary conventions are not too far away, as we mentioned. We'll see early preferences established, as Laura said, in March. After the break, we have a couple of journalists talking about the energy boom.